Hello everyone. So in this video, we are going to talk about National Education Policy 2020. Quite a few of you asked about what the new National Education Policy entails. So we are going to have 2 or 3 parts of this video. This is going to be the first part that talks about what the policy as an overview is and what it talks about school education as such. So yeah, this is going to be the part 1. So first of all, let's start with why this policy comes into being now. So there is a thing called Sustainable Development Goals, and there are a set of goals that all the countries are supposed to follow. And one of the Sustainable Development Goals, that is the SDG 4, states that the countries or the communities as such should ensure inclusive and equitable quality education and promote lifelong learning opportunities for all. So this means that there should be no discrimination, and it's more like how our constitution enshrines equality. So for all is the keyword. So meaning there should be no one left behind, if I can say that. So there are quite a few points that the education policy's introduction lays out as it necessitates the need for an educational policy now. So the first thing is the way the world functions in terms of economy and businesses and jobs are changing, and there has been a paradigm shift in terms of how important skilled jobs are rising now. So concepts like big data, machine learning and artificial intelligence are becoming very relevant these days, and it's important that our students learn that and our education focuses towards that. So these are going to be the primary anchoring knowledge areas or subjects that are going to decide how our children today are going to be part of the workforce and how they are going to progress in terms of the education. So there's mathematics, computer science, data science, along with science, social sciences and humanities. So that's going to be, if I can split it into 2 buckets, one is going to be mathematics, computer science and data science, which are intense sciences, and the other one is science, social sciences and humanities, which are on a lighter note but form an overall holistic development of the children. So that's there. And also there is another angle with regard to the environmental concerns. That's going to be climatic change, there's going to be pollution and all that. So anything we do in terms of education, innovation, business, everything should be focused on with the eye on environmental concerns as such. So that is also something that the policy enshrines. This is the most important point. Our students for a long time, and we as such, have learned a lot, but we are often lagging on what we learn and how we learn to learn. Meaning there is something that we understand, we memorize or understand in terms of concepts, but we do not know what that means. In simple terms, we memorize, we rote learn a lot of things, but the understanding and application parts for the majority of us is lagging. So that's one thing that the education policy tries to address. And it touches upon a variety of things: how to learn, how to teach. It touches upon a variety of stakeholders also, how a community should be involved, how teachers should be involved, how students should be involved. So pedagogy should cover all these things. So it should be experiential, meaning when you learn something, it is not like you learn from a book and it goes off your mind. It should be experiential. There should be some connection with the students with the topic they learn. And it should be holistic, meaning you cannot isolate one silo. For example, math cannot be learned in a silo, science cannot be learned in a silo. Everything comes in an integrated fashion at some point in time. Integrated, as I said earlier, and inquiry driven. Whatever concept a student learn must provoke a lot of questions in the student's mind. Discovery oriented, more or less connected to inquiry driven. Learner centered. So this is a very important concept that most of the educational policies lay down. A classroom or an educational infrastructure as such should be focused on the learner, that is the student, and not on who teaches or the other stakeholders involved in the process. So that's one thing. Discussion based, obviously not one-way talk, it should be discussion based, and flexible and enjoyable as such. So this is what the policy says as in one line. If we may sum it up in one line, the aim must be for India to have an education system by 2040 that is second to none, with equitable access to the highest quality education for all learners regardless of social or economic background. So with equitable access, this has been touched upon for quite some time in various laws. We've always, various political parties, irrespective of the right or left of which side of the spectrum they are, have always tried their best to ensure equitable access to education for our children, and this policy also tries to continue on that line. So there are a few precedents as to why this national education policy lays down these principles and why it comes to being now. The first is the National Education Policy of 1986, and it's been like 35 years since that policy has been reworked or modified or kind of revamped. So the National Education Policy of 1986 is kind of the forerunner for what this policy aims to achieve. And the most important development that happened after the previous National Education Policy came into being is what we call the RTE Act, the Right of Children to Free and Compulsory Education Act 2009. So the words to note here are free and compulsory, meaning those who cannot, there should be no reason with regard to finances or other resources that should make a child not be part of a school education as such. And compulsory, the word is self-explanatory. No child between the age of 6 and 14 should be left behind by not attending school. So that's what the 2009 Act enshrines, and that is what this policy aims to take forward to one notch above. 2022 fundamental principles. For example, in our budget, we had our finance minister laying down 6 pillars of the union budget. Similarly, this education policy is kind of structured around 20 to 22 fundamental principles. We'll quickly go through one by one. We're not going to go in detail. And as such, I would like to point out that there are going to be certain topics which are of academic interest and which might not be really necessary for WAT GDPI preparation as such, but we'll nevertheless go through it because it's important that we understand what this policy entails as a holistic picture. So first is recognizing, identifying and fostering the unique capabilities of each student. So at this point, we are going to see about the different types of learners in our further slides. But the thing is, there are going to be certain students or certain children who are going to be particularly good at some skills or some subjects of education, and there are going to be some others who are going to be laggards, and it's important that we recognize what the unique talents are and foster accordingly. So that's the first thing that this policy gives away. Second is according the highest priority to achieve foundational literacy and numeracy by all students by grade 3. So grade 3 is roughly when the students are around 8 years old. So by that time, the students should have foundational literacy and numeracy. What is foundational literacy and numeracy? Essentially, so in a school progression, we have primary schooling, secondary schooling and all that. And that structure is also going to be revamped, which is going to be a part of our further slides. But there are going to be certain higher order skills that are required as the students progress from one grade to another or one level to another. The foundation for which can be given by 2 parts. One is language and the other one is arithmetic, basic math and basic language. So these tendencies should be developed when the students complete grade 3. Yeah. Next is flexibility. This is again, so all these we are going to cover are going to be seen in detail in the further slides. But flexibility, the options for the students to choose their specializations at some point in time during their schooling. Yeah. The second one is no hard separation. What are we not separating or what are we compartmentalizing together? Meaning, now if we say there are curricular aspects, there are co-curricular aspects, there are extracurricular aspects, and then there are skills, traits and so on and so forth. So this policy says that there are going to be no hard separation, no rigidity between curricular and extracurricular activities, and a holistic learning of the student will involve all of these components together. Next is multidisciplinary and holistic education. This takes off slightly from here. Multidisciplinary is self-explanatory, so it's not going to be focused towards engineering or towards medicine or something of that sort, and students will be free to choose their own course, for example. Holistic, we have talked about it. The next is emphasis on conceptual understanding. Again, we talked about it. The school system shouldn't force the students to only concentrate on rote learning and memorization. There are certain components beyond that foster the cognitive development of students. Creativity and critical thinking, again the most important point that all the CEOs, all the CXOs, all the entrepreneurs keep talking about. The next is ethics and human and constitutional values. So any education shouldn't diminish what the person is ideally, and there should be certain fundamental traits and ethics that should be in place irrespective of where or how the student gets educated. Promoting multilingualism and the power of language. This is one aspect that became controversial when the draft national education policy was laid out, and then there were certain rollovers that the government had to do, but we are going to see about it in detail as well. And then there's life skills. There are going to be soft skills and hard skills. Hard skills are your understanding, application, memorization, knowledge, etc. And soft skills are communication, empathy, treating one another with respect and all that. So the next one is focus on regular formative assessment for learning. Now this one, it's kind of curious. What is a formative assessment as such? So there are 2 types of assessment in school education parlance at least. So one is a formative assessment and the other one is summative assessment. The summative assessment is the one where the bulk of learning happens, and then the big learning component it comes into being tested through one exam or one or two exams. So for example, in the CAT context, we keep learning for like 6 months, 9 months, 12 months. Some people read for 2 months and some people just take it on a breeze. And then CAT is happening on one day of the year. So CAT is like a summative assessment, whereas formative assessment operates on a different way. The students get continuously tested at various points during their academic year on the various knowledge, understanding and application components, so that their learning gets progressively modified. Yeah, the extensive use of technology, COVID happened, and then there are a lot of things that have happened ever since. EdTech has boomed, or so we seem to suggest. But yeah, there are adequate mechanisms in the national education policy that seem to suggest the use of technology as such. So the next set of principles are this: respect for diversity and the local context. So this is again something that came under the scanner when the draft national education policy was put out, and then this has been modified accordingly. Full equity and inclusion. So this is something that different parties in power have always laid out. This is one aspect that we can argue has gained bipartisan support in our country. Synergy in curriculum across all levels of education. What is all levels? That is the most crucial aspect here. All levels is the primary, pre-primary, and then secondary, higher secondary, and then higher education levels. So there should be some amount of synergy, meaning some level of connection between what we learn in school and what we learn in college and what we learn in further research areas, etc. Teachers and faculty are the heart of the learning process. So there should be some amount of reputation, respect, and sacrosanct kind of admiration that the teachers deserve, and that's one area that the policy focuses on as well. A regulatory framework to give a level of transparency, but also hold the teachers accountable for their actions, so that our learning outcomes of the students are progressive in nature. Outstanding research, continuous review, rootedness and pride in India. This is something this government especially takes pride in doing. Education is a public service, so this should always be kept in mind. There are certain areas where irrespective of whether the business is going to be for profit or non-profit, or it's a public good or private good, the overall concentration should be that education is a public service, meaning it shouldn't be money minded in the first place. Money can be one part of it, but not the main part. So substantial investment in a strong, vibrant public education system. So in one word, the policy later goes on to say that around 6% of the country's GDP should be invested towards education. So these are some of the principles. So first, we'll go to the school education. Of course, the higher education, the further parts of the education policy are going to be covered in the subsequent parts. So there are 8 focus areas when it comes to school education in this policy. The first is early childhood care and education, which is called ECCE. The second is foundational literacy and numeracy, which we saw what it means. Curtailing dropout rates and ensuring universal education. Universal, again, equity, inclusion, all that is covered in this part. Curriculum and pedagogy in schools. So this was laid out in the introduction as learning how to learn. So that is stressed upon in this aspect. Teachers, in the last slide we saw about how teaching as a profession should be honored, respected and admired, and teachers require safe and sound working environment in order for them to concentrate on what they want to do. Next is equitable inclusive education. Time and again this keeps getting repeated in the policy. Efficient resources and effective governance. So this is a curiosity inducing term which we are going to see further. There's a standard setting and accreditation for school education, and who are going to be the authority for the same. That's also going to be one aspect the school education part is going to cover. Yeah. So first we'll go one pillar after the other. So there are 8 aspects. We'll start with the first aspect. The first is early childhood care and education, which is shortly known as ECCE. We have commonly come across the terms Anganwadis, or in Tamil Nadu we say Palwadi, etc. So that is the focus of this area of the policy. So the first or the main anchoring point around which the whole ECCE proposals are revolving around is this one. 85% of a child's cumulative brain development occurs prior to the age of 6. Prior to the age of 6, meaning when a child is 6 years old, there is already some cognitive and cumulative development that the brain has undergone, and that is going to be the foundation which the child uses to then understand what is then going on and what is going to learn later. So that's one important point. So this early childhood care and education simply covers a child's education trajectory when a child is 3 years old until a child is 6 years old. So the educational pedagogy, if I may call that, starts at age 3 and goes on until age 6. That is what the focus of the early childhood care and education is concerned. So this we saw in the introduction part as well. The learning should be flexible, multifaceted, multi-level, play-based, activity-based and inquiry-based learning. Obviously, 3-year-old, 4-year-old students cannot be subjected to rigorous learning where they have to sit at one place for a long time and study different concepts of science, math, puzzles, etc. So the learning that they undergo should induce some kind of curiosity and prepare them for what is to come later in their course of education. So just a warning, whatever is in italics are not part of the education policy as such, but is of academic interest, but there is some relevance that this needs to be mentioned. So essentially in classical education terms, there are 3 different types of learners. So the first one is auditory, the second one is visual, and the third one is kinesthetic. We'll slightly briefly see about what these learners are and what they are capable of and how the learning environment should be for them to excel. So the first type of learners is auditory. The term is self-explanatory. These people excel when the learning is based on hearing. So they excel when they read a newspaper and read it out loud multiple times. They want to speak, they want to have multiple people talking to them. Discussion is something that they thrive on. They need to discuss and arrive at a consensus for an idea, and they cannot take it at face value. These are their strengths. So for example, any audio based recorded lectures or video lectures that are going to be powerful are the kind of tools that will make an auditory learner excel. The second one is visual. Again, these people are going to learn more by seeing and observing, more or less. So for them, there should be colors, creativity, there should be different visual. They're usually good at visualizing concepts. So for example, let's take a concept like mensuration. We often don't understand. Let's say there is a top face of a cube, there's a bottom face of a cube. This gets colored in this paint. This gets colored in this paint. We don't understand that. But a visual learner normally gets to visualize that easily and form the top surface, bottom surface. In engineering terms, these people are normally good at engineering graphics. So the third one is kinesthetic. These people, there are 2 characteristics that these type of learners enshrine. So one is they want to feel what they learn. For example, if you teach them about sodium chloride, they want to see and touch and feel how the sodium chloride molecule looks like, or how what is the practical application. They want to see it in practice, and they are also characterized by a lot of movement that they want to do when they are learning. For example, if you've seen Tare Zameen Par, for example, I'm not necessarily saying the student should be dyslexic, but I'm saying there should be some amount of dynamism involved for these people to learn something. They cannot sit at a place, they cannot focus for a longer period of time. They need some amount of dynamics to foster their learning. So these are 3 types of learners. So why we touched upon this is because of this. So these aspects kind of cover all the 3 types of learners, and that's a good thing. So for all these, for this multifaceted, multi-level, play-based, activity-based, all these learning to take place, there is going to be an overarching framework. So that framework is called National Curricular and Pedagogical Framework for Early Childhood Care and Education. So in short, NCPF ECC. There are going to be quite a few abbreviations and acronyms that are going to be part of this video. So anyway, for your interest, the slides will also be available, so you can make use of that. So the NCPF ECC will be split into 2 parts. One is for 0 to 3-year-olds, what they can learn right from the time they are born to until they are 3 years old. And this is the foundational program where from 3 to 8-year-old what they are going to learn and how the learning program should be structured as such. So how this ECC part is going to be institutionalized, or how it is going to be worked around in a formal structure, is through these 4 institutions. Standalone Anganwadis, we know what these are, daycare centers we may call it. And Anganwadi is co-located with primary schools, pre-primary schools, and these are self-explanatory. So these are the 4 different types of institutions that are going to foster ECC as such. So for example, why this point becomes important is, for example, let's take a case of an Anganwadi, for example. The students stay there, they are made to sleep, they are being taken care of, they are being offered food, and they are being taken for emergency needs and all that. But the Anganwadi workers in some cases might not necessarily be trained on how to educate the children, how to make the child learn. So that is something this aspect of the policy lays care upon. So it says a 6-month certification program will be provided to the Anganwadi workers or teachers to upskill and reskill them, so that the expected outcomes of this policy in terms of ECCE is covered through Anganwadi workers as catalysts. Yeah. So next, these are the 4 ministries that are going to implement the ECCE part of the policy. So the first is MHRD, or Ministry of Human Resource Development, Women and Child Development, Health and Family Welfare, and Tribal Affairs. Yeah. So the second component is foundational literacy and numeracy. We saw a brief about this earlier when we mentioned what the actual meaning of foundational literacy is. But the reason this component needs to be structured around as it is this. Around 5 crore students. So these 5 crore students can be categorized into 2 different types. One, they are in school but have not come up to the level that they can be called as masters in foundational literacy, or they are totally out of school that they do not even know what foundational literacy and numeracy and the basic ideas of writing, speaking, etc. are. So these 2 types of students occupy a major chunk, which comes out to be around 5 crore in number. So there are these many people who have not attained foundational literacy, and this becomes a huge focus area in terms of the policy itself. So as we saw in the introduction, every student has to attain foundational literacy and numeracy when or immediately after the student crosses grade 3. So there is going to be a mission on foundational literacy and numeracy that is going to be set up under MHRD. So the ministry is going to have a mission. For example, we had this water mission, we had this Clean Ganga mission, we had Swachh Bharat mission, example like that. So there's going to be a mission on foundational literacy and numeracy as such, which is going to be undertaken by MHRD. This is the most important part. This is something that Indian schooling system have been plagued for quite some time now. What is PTR? PTR is simply pupil to teacher ratio. So for how many teachers are there for how many students in a school or in a community or in a district or state or nation, country, or however we take it. So generally in India, the overall average comes out to be one teacher for every 40-45 students, and there are some schools and some areas where the ratio goes way higher, and there are some schools in remote areas where the ratio is very small. But generally on an overall level, this policy aims to achieve a student teacher ratio of 30:1. For a comparison, the European Union has a PTR ratio of around 14.7 or 14.6 according to a 2017 statistic, and there are upper and lower ranges within the EU countries itself. Greece and Luxembourg, if I'm right, have around 9:1 ratio, and there are countries like France which have a ratio of 19 or 20:1. So their upper end itself is like 19 or 20:1, whereas our target itself is 30:1. So that explains the number of students and the huge population that we are going to target in terms of this policy. So in socially disadvantaged areas, it should ideally be 25:1 is what the policy says. Why is there a special emphasis on socially disadvantaged areas? That generally there are areas that are going to be remote, there are areas that are going to be inaccessible. So in those areas, when teachers find it difficult, the student teacher ratio has to be kept as low as possible so that the learning outcomes are maximized. So in order to achieve this, every student will attain foundational literacy and numeracy by grade 3. There's going to be some foundation that needs to be put in place, which is what is explained here. There's going to be a 3-month play-based school preparation module during grade 1. Why is this very important? So grade 1 is when the student is around 5 to 6 years old. So we are talking about grade 3, which is when the student is 8 years old. So between these 3 years, the student has to achieve enormous progress so that the further levels of education can cater to them. So for that, this module becomes very important. This school preparation module is a set of fun-based activities, or that is what the policy proposes as such, which includes some amount of play, some amounts of numbers, colors, sketching, painting, art, craft, etc. So the next is, this one is very important, a repository of resources in Diksha. So we've all heard about this if we have remotely even come across some terms related to Indian education. So Diksha is an online portal that has been developed by the government, and there are enough and more database with learning plans, lesson modules, and so on and so forth. So Diksha is essentially digital infrastructure for knowledge sharing. So it's an open source kind of application that we can download and use the materials as such. So there are going to be more resources that are added specifically focused towards ECCE. That's what the policy says. And this point is stressed upon in different aspects of the policy time and time again. So peer tutoring, meaning there's one student who will be at a higher level of learning, and there'll be one student who might be at a lower level of learning, and rather than learning from teachers, it's always best that they learn together and achieve mastery in one topic or one subject. This is what we've been doing in colleges or the higher grades in school. We learn from one guy who has taken all the notes right before the day of the examination, and sometimes we end up scoring more than that guy. So that also happens. And volunteer driven teaching. Volunteer driven. So the policy talks about why it is important to involve ex-servicemen, the first graduates, the people who have attained a level of education already and who can be role models for the community, etc. So that's one aspect. And this one is very important. National Book Promotion Policy. There are quite a few privileged of us who have been fortunate enough to learn rhymes, comics, Tinkle Digest, and so on and so forth. But that's not the case for everybody. So the reading out of school is an aspect that is being stressed upon us in way of how our parents instill the same to us, or how we kind of observe and get interested in. Rather, this policy kind of forecasts a national book promotion policy, which means there are two different types of libraries or databases that are going to be set up. One is the setting up of physical libraries at different schools and school complexes and important areas of the community, so that the students have a sense of, okay, we need to read something or we need to get to know something. And then the other one is what we touched upon briefly in Diksha. There are going to be online digital resources that the students can make use of as well. So that is going to be made slightly mandatory, or that is the proposal statement as such. One thing that our governments, different state governments and the central government have always realized is that there are going to be students who are undernourished or who are not well fed, for whom education comes as a secondary thing. For them, the nutrition and being well fed is more important than getting educated. So in Tamil Nadu, we have had different political parties, right from Mr. Kamaraj, and after that the political party that succeeded them, taking the midday meal scheme from one notch to another. So that's something that this policy touches upon as well. Nutrition and well-being. So one thing is extension of midday meal scheme to provide breakfast as well. So the breakfast, the policy proposals are like, it should be light is what the policy says. So channa or some jaggery included meal or something of that sort is being proposed. And second one is regular health checkups to ensure 100% immunization. This becomes very important, especially after COVID and now that the schools are opening up. This is anyway something that should be carried out. Okay, so that's about the first ECC part. The second one is, the next aspect of the policy is this. This is a very important problem that needs to be addressed, and every policy is kind of mandated to lay forth some schemes or some proposals to address this aspect. So curtailing dropout rates and ensuring universal education. So there's a metric to measure how many people are learning, or how we measure dropout rates as such. We understand what dropout is: someone who is learning, who has decided not to learn, or who has decided not to visit the school at all, is called a dropout. So that's what we mean in common parlance. There is a metric that defines this. It's called gross enrollment ratio, shortly GER. So what is a GER? So there is a UNESCO definition for it. Number of students enrolled in a given level of education, regardless of age, expressed as a percentage of the official school age population corresponding to the same level of education. So this is what? Given level of education, same level of education. What does this mean? So for example, let's say I am 6 years old, I'm 7 years old, I have completed grade 1 and I have dropped out. 2 years later, I want to continue learning from grade 2. I am 10 years old, right? But my learning level is limited to grade 1. So even though I am 10 years old, I should be starting from grade 2. Yeah. So if I am not continuing in grade 2, I am considered a dropout from the total sample space. The total sample space includes those people who are in school as well as those people who have not been part of the schooling setup but are part of the natural population. For example, if we have 100 people in a community and 50 people have never reached school at all, and 50 people who are going through the school curriculum, the sample space is 100, even though they are not part of the schooling system as such. So the gross enrollment ratio in this case comes out to be 50%. So that's what the GER is. So now, through various decentralized and centralized schemes that have been established throughout the country, we have attained a near universal GER in elementary education. What is near universal GER? We are closing in on 100%. So when a child is born, when he or she is 3 year or 4 year or 5 year old, there is a tendency that these children will automatically go to school. So that much we have achieved, and how we carry that momentum forward is something that this policy touches upon. So as such, the continuation is sort of becoming bleak every level by level. For grade 6 to 8, the GER stands at 90.9%, and for grades 9 to 10, it goes to 79.3%, which itself is a huge drop. And then there is a steep fall from 79.3% to 56.5%. So out of 100 people who get enrolled in school, almost 99 people to 100 people cross elementary education. 90 people cross the next level, 80 the next level, and when they go out of school, there are only 57 people, meaning there is a significant chunk of people, 43 out of every 100, that we are losing out because they are not able to cross the schooling system for some reason or the other. Yeah. So this point is what is being touched upon in the following point. Yeah. There is a survey that happens by NSSO. NSSO is National Sample Survey Office, which takes different types of surveys. It comes under what we call MOSPI, the Ministry of Statistics and Program Implementation. So that's a survey that got done in 2017 and 18, and it says there are these many people. There are 3.22 crore people between the age of 6 and 17 years who are out of school for some reason or the other. Earlier, we saw a number, 5 crore students who have not achieved foundational literacy in numeracy. Now, this is an equally worrying statistic. 3.2 crore people approximately between 6 and 17 years are out of school. So that needs to be addressed, and these many people have to be brought into the fold of school education through our policy mechanisms. 2 initiatives. So, since the SDG 4 itself stated we have to achieve inclusive education for all by 2030. So that is something this policy aims to address. So these are the 2 different initiatives that we are going to see. Effective and sufficient infrastructure and alternative and innovative education centers. So let's split into 2 parts. So the first is effective and sufficient infrastructure. What is this? So there should be a safe and sound and curiosity inducing learning environment for the students, so that they feel welcome to come to school. It's almost like they should feel this is a second home or home away from home, so that their learning is automated and kind of joyful rather than it being forced as a component in their life. So in order to do that, there should be proper adequate infrastructure, there should be toilet facilities, there should be drinking water facilities, and the playground should be fine and all that. The second part is alternative and innovative education system, education centers. So why are these important? So the name itself kind of suggests what it means. There are going to be different people who are specially abled, who have learning disabilities, who have psychological issues, who might want to experience a different sort of learning that what some of us might have experienced in terms of school education. So that is an aspect that needs to be covered as well, because that shouldn't be a reason some of the children are out of school, and the system as such cannot foster that. So that's one aspect that needs to be addressed. The second is tracking students and their learning levels. Why should this be done? So tracking often gets kind of misconstrued in a bad light, because tracking is associated with surveillance, and when governments do mass surveillance, we take it in a very bad light. But this tracking is very important, because we need to the systems need to know how the learning levels are progressing and how the students are proceeding from one level to another, and what kind of programs and rollback mechanisms need to be put in place so that this learning outcomes can be maximized to the next level. So the first and foremost, and we need to make it as dark as possible, the students need to be enrolled and attending school. The first and foremost fundamental, the most basic goal that any education system needs to achieve is making sure the students are enrolled. First they start coming to school, and then we'll focus on learning outcomes and all of that. The next is, okay, we've enrolled and they've started attending school, but for some reason they're dropping out, or they go out of school. What are the other fallback mechanisms to make them come back to the fold of school education? So that is something that this point addresses. Catch-up mechanism to provide re-entry and avoid falling behind and dropping out. So there are certain bridge courses, there are going to be speed learning processes to make sure they catch up and they don't feel like they're lost out on their life. So that is something. So now we've covered the basic process, why the students, how the students can be made to come to school, and what are the mechanisms to do that. Now they've started coming. What else? So first, infrastructure has been put in place. Now there comes quality. Just because there's a huge chunk of population comes in and start educating, we cannot use it as an excuse to dilute the quality of education that is being provided. So these are the 2 areas that the policy wishes to focus upon. One is system of incentives for deploying teachers with the knowledge of local language to ensure student retention. So there are many research that point out that when there is a kind of a rapport between the teacher and the student wants to come to school only because of the teacher. So to ensure that the one aspect that can bridge this gap and kind of develop a rapport between the student and the teacher is the knowledge of local language. So this system tries to incentivize the teachers, and the second is overhauling the curriculum, as in we saw about it, moving away from mere rote memorization to other aspects of learning. So the non-formal education mode, ODL through NAOS and SAOS, there are many abbreviations which seem alien to us. We'll see. Non-formal education mode is, so what is formal education? Formal education is us as students going to a place for learning, which happens to be schools, and sitting there from time X to time Y per day for 5 days a week or 6 days a week throughout the academic year for so many years, and then coming out with some basic qualification, right? This is the basic outline of the formal education. So what is non-formal education? For example, if we take a course on Udemy, in our case, if we take a course on Udemy or Coursera or some MOOC platform, then that's the non-formal education, so some certification program or something of that sort. So this program touches upon that for school education as well. So what are these? What is an ODL? ODL is open and distance learning. So distance learning, what we call in common parlance as correspondence, and open and distance learning is open meaning I need not have a fundamental qualification criteria to study one course. For example, if I want to study a course on Udemy about Python, I need not know C or C++ or Java or whatever is the prerequisite to enroll for that course. So that is open. Distance learning is not going to an environment, sitting at a place and learning from our place at our convenience. NAOS, National Institute of Open Schooling, SIOS, State Institute of Open Schooling. So these are going to be the catalyst that implement these and ensure non-formal education modes are also put in place. So lesser focus on inputs and greater focus on output potential. This is very important. What does this relate to? When someone wants to set up a school, for example, this policy states that now in the current framework we have, the input restrictions for someone to set up a school are so high and the mechanisms are so rigorous that many people, many philanthropic organizations do not want to set up school. So the focus on inputs will come down and greater focus will be put upon output potential. What that school offers after it's being set up and what the students are able to do, rather than why they should set up the school in the first place. That's what this policy talks about. Volunteer driven approach, this is something we touched upon earlier, so we'll move on. The next one, this is the longer like the most important part in the school education of NEP, the curriculum and pedagogy in schools. So this as such has been taken from the document itself. So you can see it in the official National Education Policy 2020 document. So it talks about how we are going to revamp how our education structure looks when it comes to school education. So it says that up to the age of 5 or 6 normally, the students are not involved in some sort of formal learning structure. So some of us go to kindergarten, but not many people can do that. So essentially this portion is something that the students lose out on in the current structure, and ages 6 to 16 are when the foundation, the preparatory part, the middle school and everything else takes upon. So these 10 years form the crucial part of how the student moves on to progress in the later parts of life. The second is this one. So this is the 10 plus 2 structure as such. So grades 1 to 10 and grade plus 1 plus 2. We still make it a habit to say 11th and 12th is plus 1 and plus 2. So this is where it comes from. Now what the structure looks like in terms of the new education policy proposal is, as we saw earlier, it starts with the ECCE, which is referred to as the foundational learning component. So there are going to be 2 components in that, from 3 to 6 where Anganwadis and Balvatikas are going to be in place, and we also saw that the 6-year certification program are going to be given to the teachers so that they are getting trained, and these are going to be where the actual sort of learning process starts happening, numbers and the basic learning, the foundational literacy starts happening here. Then they move on to this part. So remember, when they step into grade 3, they should have already attained foundational literacy and numeracy. That is what the aim of the policy was in the earlier part, right? So by the time when they come from this level to this level, they should have foundational literacy and numeracy in place. How does that benefit the students? So this is where, so the aspect itself is slightly named as preparatory. So what is preparatory? So there is a bridge. There's this one level, middle school, there's foundational. This course acts as a bridge between foundational program and the middle school, and therefore prepare students for this level. What is class 6 to 8? So slowly from class 6 to 8, the students start getting exposed to textbooks, what we might call mundane or boring forms of learning. So they have specialized subject teachers, they start learning subject by subject, not as just numbers or vague concepts like words, letters, numbers, etc. So this phase prepares the students for this, and then the final one is class 9 to 12, well, which is called as a secondary level. So this is something that we saw on the earlier slide. 10 plus 2 structure will be revamped as 5 plus 3 plus 3 plus 4. These are the 4 stages, just also we briefly touched upon. So the foundational stage, as we saw in the ECC module, that module covers whatever is going to be the parts of foundational stage. So let's start from preparatory and move on to middle school and secondary stage. Preparatory stage. So light textbooks, this is very important. The textbooks are not going to have mark based or like very rigorous concepts as such, but they slowly start preparing the students to the idea of textbooks, to the idea of reading and getting to know words, getting to know paragraphs, lessons, etc. That compartmentalization of subjects and lessons that need to be put in place is facilitated through light textbooks. Interactive classroom learning. In this phase, when people are in grades 3 to 5, they cannot be expected to sit in one place. We might have had experiences where we have asked stupid questions to our teachers and have been scolded, or some teachers would have smiled and explained the answers for us. So that is the interactive classroom learning. On a tangent, we can afford to take a tangent. There's something called flipped classroom, where the students decide what should be taught, etc. So that's an interesting concept. You might want to read up on that. It's of academic interest, not relevant to policy as such. Emphasis on reading, writing, speaking, physical education, art, language, science and mathematics. So when it comes to any language or any mechanism of learning, there are 4 components involved, and we might have come across this at several points in life, though we may not know the exact terms. One is reading, other one is writing, speaking and listening. So these are components that get tested in various competitive exams as well. So when we consider TOEFL, GRE, GMAT, there are various components, some of which get tested in some exams and some other in other exams, but these are the 4 components of any learning process as such: reading, writing, speaking and listening. In addition, these are some aspects that are very important. Science and mathematics, of course, comes naturally in terms of our curriculum, but these are some parts that we might lose out on, especially given how the focus is increasingly becoming digital and all that. So next is the middle stage. This is very important. This is what this prepared the students for. So the students slowly started getting used to lighter textbooks, and now there are subject specific teachers. There's English, there's language, there's math, there's science, there's social, there's humanity, there's art, everything else. So the students kind of get to sense that these are going to be these subjects, these are going to be textbooks for that, and that kind of automation starts getting into the students. More abstract concepts that we know, these are mostly play based, and these improve this physical education part and all that, improve the cognitive aspect of the students, and that lands up here. Prepare them for learning more abstract concepts. For example, if I say a longitudinal wave, a transverse wave, for example, you need to be able to understand what the basics of that are. So that's one thing. The next is secondary stage, multidisciplinary studies. We saw about it earlier when we talked about there is no rigorous compartmentalization between curricular and extracurricular activities. So multidisciplinary studies focus on depth, critical thinking, attention to life aspirations and flexibility and student choice of subjects. So Indian parents typically are associated with not allowing their children to do this. It could be stereotyped or it could be reality. We never know that, and we cannot judge someone for doing that decision. But the policy as such requires, proposes to move away from that concept. It offers multidisciplinary subjects based on what the students want to become. There's going to be flexibility in terms of what the students can choose. But this flexibility comes only at the secondary stage, mind you, not at the earlier stages. So when the students reach 9th grade, the policy says that there should be some autonomy given to the students to choose what they want to learn. So this is an interesting concept which is of academic interest. This might not be relevant towards WAT GDPA preparation as such, but the interesting concept that people who are venturing out into the education sector as such at least want to learn. There was someone called Benjamin Bloom. He was an American educational psychologist. He sort of put out a framework as to how the learning levels of students progress from one level to another. So according to him, according to his hypothesis, framework, whatever you might call it, there are 6 levels of learning. that the student goes through. The first part that forms the base of the pyramid is knowledge. As such, the base should be broad. So the knowledge that the student acquires should be broad, and then there should be understanding, application, analysis, synthesis, and evaluation. So what do each of these levels mean? Knowledge is, for example, the fact that the student should understand how multiplying two negative numbers results in a positive number. That is the knowledge part. So then he gets to understand how the mechanics of it works. So for example, by plotting the numbers in a number line and getting to understand where the negative numbers are, where the positive numbers are, for example, that is the understanding component. Next is the application part. Let's say the child who learns all these concepts goes to a shop to buy a chocolate or a pen or whatever. The child pays some money, buys some articles, and calculates, okay, I paid this, that was a credit, the shopkeeper gave this, that was what I got. So what transaction is happening? In way of learning this, if the child is able to apply the concept to understand that, that is the application part. Analysis, what could have happened? For example, if the child paid 5 rupees and it got 5 chocolates, if the child starts thinking about what would have happened if I paid 4.5 or 5.5, what would have happened? What is the credit? What is the debit? Why is that? What is the unit value of that chocolate? These are the analysis part. Then the synthesis, the inferences that the child makes by understanding or analyzing this component gets formed as an idea inside the child's mind. That is the synthesis part. And then there is evaluation. The child can improvise on this idea to come up with a concept or a theory or whatever. So in common parlance, especially after the business talks came into being, this is something that the revised Bloom's taxonomy says. Essentially, it is a reworded version of the same 6 components. Now remember, understand, apply, analyze, evaluate, and create. So that's about it.